see all my friends from North Carolina right here. Let me thank you, first of all, thank God for safe travel to be here today. Let me thank Dequan. I have sons his age, and as I begin to get older, I'm really thankful when young people can see something you're trying to do, but more importantly, when I know that our future is in good hands with brothers like Dequan, because the real issue in leadership is not so much what you do, but the kind of legacy you empower others to do and do it better. And he is and will be one of our best and brightest leaders, and I want you to give it up. To the Queen. To Brother Minor, who has his own way of getting you to do what he wants you to do. You all know I wasn't asked if I would come. I was somehow or another told. To President Woods, our president here in the city of Richmond, let's give it up for her. Pastor of this church, I've been here before, and I thank God for him and his leadership here. To my executive assistant who's here with me, Ms. Turner, and the Phil. Where's Phil? Phil, right back there. He said this, talking to us when we were coming to Chesapeake. So whatever I say today, blame it on Phil and Brother Mine. I want to bring you greetings from the Forward Together Moral Movement and the historic Thousands on Jones Street People's Assembly Coalition in North Carolina. It's good to be among brothers and sisters. It's good to be among those of you I see who traveled all the way up from North Carolina. We fight together. We stand together. Today, I want to talk for a moment, and I know we were going to start at 3, and they told me I had about 40 minutes, so I want to, hopefully we start a little late. The time has not been cut because there are some very serious things I want to talk about. I'm not a bumper sticker speaker. I'm not somebody who just finds cute phrases and throws them. The times demand something much more serious. The time demands a depth analysis of what's really going on if we're going to mobilize. So I want to talk about how moral dissenters are a necessity for the future of this democracy. Moral dissenters are a necessity. There is a scripture in the Jewish text, Psalm 94, where it says, raises this question: who will rise up for me against the evildoers? And who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity and injustice? And then in Luke chapter 4, verse 18, in the Message Bible, it says, God's Spirit is on me. He has chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim pardon to the prisoner, recovery of sight to the blind, set the burden and the battered free, and to announce that this is God's year to act. Jewish theologians would tell you that song text from Psalm 94 is God puts on the lips of the psalmist a question for the ages. The question that must be raised in a time of political oppression and systemic injustice. In a time when those in power are so drunk with that power that they are using it in ways to hurt and to harm the vulnerable. God says, who will rise up against the workers of injustice? In other words, who will dissent? Who will challenge what's going on? The tragedy of the psalmist's text is that God is confused because God has lost his people. Now that's strange if you believe God is omnipresent. God is saying, I can't understand. I brought somebody out of Egypt. I brought them through and up through injustice. Where are my people who know what injustice looks like and know what it feels like? Where are they? Why are they silent? Who will rise up? And the sadness in the text is that if God, him or herself, had not stood up, nobody would have stood up and raised the dissent against the workers of injustice. In the Luke text, Jesus is operating out of what we call, Walter Brueggemann calls prophetic imagination. You find that he's lifting up actually the Jewish text, the Hebrew text, Isaiah 58, 59, 61. And Jesus rises in the ghetto of Nazareth. Nazareth was the ghetto. And it was in the middle of Roman domination. It was a society of deep divisions and social economic stratification. Arthur Philip Easler says that in Jesus' time, the 1% ruled with pride and arrogance over the 99%. In other words, in Jesus' time, social Darwinism was the order of the day, even before Darwin was existing. It was a time when the sick were left to fend for themselves. The jobless were called by the great poet Cicero the dregs of the city. The poor were seen as a nuisance and not neighbors by the ruling, wealthy, and political elites. And it's interesting. Contrary to the far-right Christians who often rally so much about so much that God says so little about. Contrary to that kind of morality that talks about personal morality, which is between you, your God, and your priest, Jesus, when he preaches his first sermon, engages in a critique of public morality. And over against the structures of oppression, he lifts a prophetic vision and engages in moral dissent. And he declares, listen, Jesus' first sermon, what we call in theological school, this is nominal. This is nominal preaching. In other words, all other declarations of preaching must be judged by this sermon. This is it. This is the foundation. And Jesus says, those pushed to the side by the political powers of his day and by the religionists who supported the political powers and became the chaplains of the state rather than the critic of the state, those dismissed, those disdained, those disregarded by the politics of his day were in fact the center of God's agenda. The center of God's moral agenda. The poor in Luke 4 comes from a word patokos in Greek. It means those who have been made poor by systemic policies and decisions of those in power. And Jesus says in his first sermon, which becomes nominal preaching for all other sermons, that unless the poor, the dispossessed, the vulnerable, those on the margins, children, women, and others are at the center of public power, then any claim to being a moral agent is deeply suspect and more than likely hypocritical. Now, Walter Brueggemann says that the work of the moral critique of the prophetic voice is not to ask the question first if something can be changed or implemented. The first thing that the moral agent is to do is to create a vision where we can imagine change. The imagination of change must come before the implementation towards change. People must have the hope, the kind of hope that is the refusal to accept a reading of reality according to the majority of people. And this hope is subversive. If you dare to imagine like this, it could get you killed. Remember, all that got Dr. King killed was saying, I have a dream. And daring to imagine a reality over and above the current situation. And calling that current situation into question. You see, moral dissent or prophetic imagination is where we stand in contrast and we dissent to the ways of domination, destruction, and injustice. And we declare by our words and our actions that there must be a better way. And we're not alone. When we join in moral dissent, that's what the Virginia's People Assembly is about. And moral, as I said, is not just about private, personal morality. Budgets are moral documents. Educational policy is moral documents. How we pay women is a moral issue. Immigrant rights are moral issues. Educational policy is a moral issue. Labor rights is a moral issue. And we're not alone. Abolitionist William Lord Garrison was once rescued from being lynched by a pro-slavery mob. And on his jail cell, he wrote, William Lord Garrison was put in this cell Wednesday, October 21st, 1835, to save him from the violence of a respectable and influential mob who sought to destroy him for preaching the abominable and dangerous doctrine that all men are created equal. That's moral dissent. And neither persecution nor the time diminished his radicalism. Henry David Thoreau, when he was protesting the war, he wrote an essay entitled On Resistance to Civil Government. He said, when there is an unjust law, like laws legalizing the institution of slavery, then it is the duty of every man to break that law. A true patriot would not allow injustice to stand. Thoreau's friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, visited him one night in jail, and he asked Henry, he said, Henry, what are you doing in jail, somebody like you? It's outrageous. And Thoreau said, Ralph, what are you doing out there? If injustice is alive, what are you doing out there? If being out there means you have to keep your mouth closed and not say anything about what's going on. When white clergy criticized Dr. King for coming to Birmingham, he wrote that letter from the Birmingham jail 50 years ago this year. They said he was an outsider, kind of like what McCory and the right-wingers said about Moral Monday, even though they were wrong, but that's what they said. Dr. King said, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's moral dissent. Somebody say moral dissent. And even recently, when Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she became the voice. She became a preacher on the bench. Did y'all hear it? Let me give you her sermon. When they voted on the Shelby case and sought to undermine Section 4 and then thereby nullify Section 5, Ginsburg wrote, hubris, pride, is a fit word for today's demolition of the Voting Rights Act. Throwing out the pre-clearance formula when it has worked and is continuing to work is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. And then Justice Ginsburg did not just talk about the Constitution, she went above the Constitution to a higher law. And she said to every justice up there, remember Bloody Sunday. And she quoted from Dr. Martin Luther King's Hope for Determination when she said, whatever you have done today, do not forget this. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it ends toward justice. And so moral dissenters are in good company. I could list a lot more. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Cesar Chavez. So many others could be listed. And I lift that up today to talk about this need for people's assemblies and moral movements around this nation, because we are in a crisis, a moral, political, economic crisis. We suffer from attention violence toward systemic racism, poverty, and the poor. A political economist from the University of Maryland said, what we are really beginning to experience in America, in an article called America Beyond Capitalism, is the process of slow decay punctuated by a recurring economic crisis, one in which reforms achieve sporadic gains, but the long-term trends of growing inequality, economic dislocation, failing democratic accountability, deepening poverty, ecological degradation, greater invasions of liberty, and growing imprisonment, especially among minorities, continues to slowly and quietly challenge the belief in the capacity and moral integrity of the overall system and its governing elites. Now, this author is not someone who is anti-capitalism, but like Dr. King did in his book, Strive Toward Freedom, he is critiquing capitalism that has gone crazy. Yeah.